It was a bright and sunny Saturday morning in Pinewood Estates. This was a quiet little neighborhood where houses sat neatly in rows, and people usually kept to themselves, or at least, that's what I thought. My name's Jake, and I was just a regular guy living a simple life with my dog, Max. Max was a golden retriever, big and fluffy, with a goofy grin that could make anyone smile. He wasn't the kind of dog who growled or barked at strangers. No way. Max was more likely to run up and lick your face than do anything mean. He was my best buddy, and we had a pretty happy life together. But not everyone saw Max the way I did. Across the street from my house lived a lady named Karen Miller. Now, Karen wasn't like most people in Pinewood Estates. She was the kind of neighbor who always had something to say, and it was never anything nice. You know the type, right? The person who's always peeking out their window, watching everyone, waiting for something to complain about. That was Karen. She'd stand there behind her blinds, her eyes squinting, ready to point out anything she didn't like. And boy, did she hate Max. To Karen, Max wasn't a sweet, friendly pup. Nope. She called him a dangerous beast. Can you believe that? A dog who'd rather chase his tail than chase a person. She thought he was some kind of monster. Every time Max and I stepped outside, I could feel her staring at us. She'd stand on her porch or peek through her window, her lips all tight and scrunched up, like she'd just eaten a sour lemon. She'd glare at Max like he was about to ruin her whole day. It was silly, really, because Max didn't even notice her. He was too busy wagging his tail or sniffing the grass. Now, I didn't let Karen bother me too much. I'd just wave at her sometimes, nice and friendly, even though she never waved back. See, I'm the kind of guy who likes to keep things calm. I didn't want any trouble. I just wanted to enjoy my days with Max, throwing his ball in the yard or taking him for walks around the block. But Karen? She wasn't happy unless she was mad about something. And she decided Max was her big problem. Little did Karen know, though, her perfect little world was about to turn upside down. She thought she was the boss of everything, always telling people what to do, always acting like she owned the whole neighborhood. But I had a secret. A big one. And it wasn't about Max. Nope, it was about me. Karen had no idea who I really was or what I was up to. She thought I was just some regular guy with a dog, someone she could boss around whenever she felt like it. But oh, was she wrong. Her days of glaring and complaining were about to come crashing down, and she didn't even see it coming. Let me paint you a picture of how it all started. That sunny Saturday morning, I woke up early. The birds were chirping outside, and the sky was a bright blue with not a single cloud. Max was already bouncing around the house, ready to play. I grabbed his leash, and we headed out the front door. The air smelled fresh, like flowers and cut grass, and I could hear kids laughing somewhere down the street. It was the kind of day that makes you feel good, you know? Max trotted along beside me, his tongue hanging out, happy as can be. We were just minding our own business, enjoying the sunshine. But then, there was Karen. I saw her right away, standing on her porch across the street. She had her arms crossed, her face all grumpy, like she'd been waiting for us to come outside just so she could get mad. I didn't think much of it at first. She was always grumpy. But that day, something felt different. She wasn't just watching us, she was studying us, like a hawk watching a mouse. I could almost feel her eyes burning into me and Max as we walked by. I gave her a little wave, just to be nice, but she didn't wave back. She just kept staring, her lips getting tighter and tighter. I figured she'd go back inside soon, like she usually did. But nope, not this time. She took a step forward and shouted, "Hey! That dog better not come near my yard." Her voice was loud and sharp, cutting through the quiet morning like a whistle. I stopped walking and looked at her. Max tilted his head, confused, his tail still wagging. "He's on a leash, Karen," I called back, keeping my voice calm. "He's not going anywhere near your yard." But she didn't care. She shook her head and muttered something under her breath, then turned and stomped back into her house. I shrugged and kept walking. Max didn't even notice, he was too busy sniffing a flower. That's when I started to realize Karen wasn't just annoyed. She was obsessed. She didn't like Max, sure, but it was more than that. She didn't like me. She thought I was some pushover, Some guy she could yell at whenever she wanted. And maybe I let her think that for a while. Why? Because I didn't want her to know the truth. Not yet. See, I wasn't just Jake, the guy with the dog. I was something else, something Karen would never guess in a million years. And every time she yelled at me or glared at Max, she was digging herself into a bigger mess. She just didn't know it. So, friends, that's where this crazy story begins. A sunny day, a happy dog, and a neighbor who thought she could control everything. But things were about to get wild, wilder than Karen could ever imagine. I had a secret up my sleeve, and it was going to change everything. What was it? Well, you'll have to stick around to find out. But before we go any further, I've got a question for you. What's the wildest thing a neighbor's ever complained about to you? Maybe they got mad about your bike in the driveway or your music being too loud. Drop your answer in the comments, I'd love to hear your stories. Oh, and if you're liking this so far, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you can catch the rest of this tale. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. It all kicked off one afternoon when I decided to take Max for a walk. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and Max was trotting along beside me, his leash wrapped tight around my hand. We weren't bothering anybody, just strolling down the sidewalk in Pinewood Estates, enjoying the day. Max's fluffy tail wagged like a little flag, and I was smiling, thinking about how lucky I was to have such a good dog. Everything felt peaceful. That is, until Karen showed up. Out of nowhere, she came charging out of her house like a tornado wearing flip-flops. Her face was red, her eyes were wide, and she was pointing right at Max. That dog shouldn't be off-leash, she yelled, her voice so loud it made my ears hurt. I stopped walking and looked at her, confused. Max was on his leash right there in my hand, plain as day. He wasn't running loose or causing trouble. He was just sniffing the ground, happy as could be. But Karen didn't care about the truth. She kept pointing and screeching, "He's a danger. He shouldn't be out here like that." I took a deep breath and tried to stay nice. "Karen," I said, holding up the leash so she could see it, "he's not off leash. Look, he's right here with me." My voice was calm, like I was talking to a little kid who didn't understand something simple. But Karen? She didn't want to hear it. She shook her head so fast I thought it might fall off. "No," she snapped. "I'm calling the HOA. You're going to get a big fine for this." She pulled her phone out of her pocket and waved it around like it was some kind of magic wand that could make me disappear. Then she turned and stomped back toward her house, muttering under her breath. I just stood there for a second, watching her go. Max looked up at me with his big brown eyes, tilting his head like he was asking, "What's her problem?" I shrugged and gave him a pat on the head. "Don't worry, buddy," I said. "She's just being Karen." Then I smiled a little secret smile and we kept walking. See, Karen thought she could boss me around like I was some scared kid. She thought I'd get all upset and beg her not to call the HOA. But I didn't. I didn't argue or yell back. I just kept walking, cool as a cucumber. And that drove her crazy. Here's the thing, Karen didn't know who I really was. She thought I was just Jake, the guy with the dog, some regular neighbor she could pick on whenever she felt like it. But I wasn't just some random guy. I'd been watching her for weeks, not in a spooky, sneaky way, but because I had a job to do. A big job. Every time she came outside to yell at me, every time she pointed her finger or scribbled something in that little notebook she always carried, I noticed. I didn't say anything about it, though. I just stayed quiet and kept my eyes open. Why? Because I knew something she didn't. Something huge. And it was eating her up inside that I wouldn't fight back. You should have seen her face every time I waved at her or smiled. It was like she couldn't figure me out. She'd yell, "Keep that dog away from my yard," and I'd say, "Sure thing, Karen," all polite and happy. She'd glare at me, her lips scrunched up like she'd bitten something sour, and I'd just keep going about my day. It wasn't that I didn't care, I did. But I had a plan. And every time she got mad, she was making my plan even better. She didn't know it, but she was walking right into a trap. My trap. Let me tell you more about that afternoon. After Karen stormed off with her phone, I took Max around the block. The neighborhood was quiet again, just the sound of leaves rustling in the breeze and Max's paws tapping on the sidewalk. I could still hear Karen's voice in my head, all loud and bossy, but I pushed it away. I wasn't going to let her ruin my day. Max didn't deserve that, and neither did I. So we kept walking, past the neat little houses with their green lawns and flower beds. Every now and then, I'd glance back at Karen's place. I could see her shadow moving behind the blinds. She was probably writing down everything she saw, thinking she was so smart. But here's what she didn't get: I was watching her, too. Not just that day, but every day for weeks. I'd see her peek out her window when I mowed my lawn. I'd catch her staring when I played fetch with Max in the yard. She'd even come outside sometimes, pretending to water her flowers, just so she could keep an eye on us. And every time she did, I'd smile and wave, like nothing was wrong. It made her so mad. She wanted me to get upset. She wanted me to argue or complain. But I didn't give her what she wanted. I stayed calm, because I knew something she didn't. Something that was going to turn her whole world upside down. See, Karen thought she was in charge. She thought she could yell at me and Max and make us feel small. She'd call the HOA, wave her phone around, and act like she ruled the neighborhood. But I wasn't scared of her. Not even a little bit. Why? Because I had a secret, a big, juicy secret that she'd never guess. And every time she got mad at me, every time she wrote something in that notebook, she was making things worse for herself. She didn't know it yet, but I was the one in control. Not her. That afternoon, as Max and I finished our walk, I started thinking about how funny it all was. Karen was so sure she had me figured out. She thought I was just some guy she could push around. But I wasn't. I was Jake with a plan. And while she was busy yelling and complaining, I was quietly putting everything together. She could scream all she wanted. She could call the HOA 100 times. It didn't matter. Because soon, very soon, she was going to find out the truth. And when she did, oh boy, she wouldn't know what hit her. So that's how it started, friends. A simple walk with my dog turned into the beginning of something big. Karen thought she was winning, but she had no idea what was coming. What do you think my secret could be? Any guesses? Drop them in the comments. I'd love to see what you come up with. And stick around, because this story's just getting started. Days went by after that big yelling scene with Karen, and things didn't calm down, not even a little bit. If anything, Karen got bolder. She wasn't just mad anymore, she was on a mission. Every day, she found new ways to pick on me and Max. It started with little things, like leaving nasty notes taped to my front door. I'd come outside in the morning, ready to take Max for a walk, and there'd be a piece of paper stuck there with big, angry words scribbled on it. One said, "Control your mutt." Another one barked, "I'm reporting you." She wrote those notes like she was the boss of the whole world, telling me what to do with my own dog. Max didn't care about the notes, of course. He'd just wag his tail and sniff the door while I pulled them off and tossed them in the trash. I didn't get mad or yell back. Nope. I'd just look across the street at Karen's house, give her a big, friendly wave, and go about my day. Sometimes I'd see her peeking out her window when I waved, her face all scrunched up and fuming. She hated that I didn't fight back. She wanted me to get upset, to argue, to give her something to complain about even more. But I didn't. I stayed cool and happy, and it drove her up the wall. Then one day, Karen took it up a notch. I was out in the yard with Max, just letting him sniff around like dogs do. He found a bush near the sidewalk and stuck his nose in it, wagging his tail like he'd discovered treasure. It was the cutest thing. But not to Karen. Oh no. She came marching out of her house with her phone in her hand, snapping pictures of Max like he was some kind of criminal. Click, click, click. She stood there, pointing her phone at him, muttering, "This is proof." Sniffing bush is totally against the rules. I couldn't believe it. A dog sniffing a bush? That's not a crime. That's just a dog being a dog. I looked at her and waved again, all friendly like. "Hey, Karen." I called out. "He's just sniffing. No big deal, right?" But she didn't answer. She just kept taking pictures, her lips pressed tight together, like she was building a giant case against us. I almost laughed right there in the yard, but I held it in. She stormed back inside, probably thinking she'd won some big victory. But here's the thing, she didn't see what I was doing. While she was busy snapping her silly pictures and writing her mean notes, I was taking my own notes. Yup, that's right. Every time she complained, every time she threw a tantrum, I wrote it down in a little notebook I kept in my pocket. She had no idea. See, Karen thought she was winning. She thought she was so smart, catching me and Max breaking her made-up rules. But I was waiting for the perfect moment to turn everything around. I didn't let her know that, though. I just kept smiling, kept waving, kept acting like everything was fine. And all the while, my notebook was filling up with stuff she'd done. Every note she left, every time she yelled, every picture she took, it all went in there. She didn't have a clue that I was keeping track. Then one evening, things got even wilder. The sun was going down, and the sky was turning all pink and orange. I was inside my house, sitting by the window with a cup of juice, when I saw something weird. There was Karen, sneaking around my front yard with a flashlight. She was tiptoeing through the grass, shining that light all over the place like she was a detective in a movie. I peeked out from behind my curtain and watched her. She was muttering to herself, saying stuff like, "Looking for evidence, gotta find something." Her voice was low, but I could hear it through the glass. I almost laughed out loud right then and there. Evidence? Of what? Max digging a hole? Me forgetting to pick up his ball? It was so silly. But Karen was serious. She crept around, shining her flashlight on my bushes and my porch, like she was going to find some big secret. I stayed quiet and kept watching, trying not to giggle. She looked so funny out there, all sneaky-like, with her flip-flops flapping on the ground. But here's the real joke, she had no clue the real evidence was piling up against her. Not me, not Max, her. See, Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor who liked to complain. Oh no. She was breaking rules of her own, big ones. And I was the one keeping track of it all. Every time she thought she was catching me doing something wrong, she was actually making her own mess bigger. I knew stuff about her that she didn't think anybody knew. Stuff she'd been doing behind everyone's backs, stuff that wasn't okay. And while she was busy sneaking around my yard with her flashlight, I was adding more to my notebook. She thought she was so clever, but I was the one with the upper hand. That night, after she gave up and went back to her house, I sat down and thought about it all. Karen was getting bolder every day, notes, pictures, sneaking around. She was so sure she was in charge, so sure she could scare me into doing what she wanted. But I wasn't scared. Not even a little bit. Why? Because I had a plan, and it was working perfectly. Every mean thing she did, every time she tried to boss me around, it just made my plan stronger. She didn't know it yet, but she was walking right into something big, something that was going to flip her whole world upside down. I looked at Max, who was curled up on the floor next to me, snoring softly. "She's got no idea, does she, buddy?" I said, giving him a scratch behind the ears. He wagged his tail in his sleep, happy as ever. Karen could huff and puff all she wanted, but I was the one holding the real power. Not her silly notes or her flashlight, me. And soon, she'd find out why. So, friends, things were heating up in Pinewood Estates. Karen was getting wilder, and I was getting ready. What do you think she was looking for with that flashlight? And what do you think my big plan could be? Drop your guesses in the comments. I can't wait to see what you come up with. This story's getting good, so stick around for what's next. Then came the day everything went boom like a big, loud firework in the sky. It was a regular afternoon, and I was out in my front yard with Max, playing fetch. The sun was shining, and Max was having the best time ever, chasing his red ball across the grass. I'd toss it, he'd run after it, and then he'd bring it back, his tail wagging like crazy. We were laughing and playing, just me and my goofy dog, not bothering anyone. It was one of those perfect moments where everything felt good until Karen showed up. She marched across the street like she was on a warpath. Her face was red, like a tomato about to burst, and her eyes were all wild and angry. She stopped right at the edge of my yard and pointed at Max, who was sitting there with his ball, looking happy as can be. "That's it," she screamed, her voice so loud it made Max's ears perk up. "I'm calling 911. Your dog's a menace." I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could get a word out, she yanked her phone from her pocket and started dialing. She didn't even wait, she just started yelling into it. Help! There's a dangerous animal loose. Send someone now. I stood there, watching her, and leaned against my porch with my arms crossed. I had to try really hard not to grin, because this was getting good. Karen was stomping around, waving her phone like it was a sword, shouting about how Max was some big, scary monster. Max, by the way, just tilted his head and wagged his tail, like he was wondering what all the fuss was about. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Karen was too busy yelling to notice what was happening right behind her, and oh boy, it was something big. See, while Karen was screaming into her phone, a police car was rolling up the street. Quietly, slowly, it pulled closer, the tires crunching on the road. Karen didn't hear it. She didn't see it. She was too busy telling 911 all about the dangerous animal in my yard. But I saw it. I saw the flashing lights on top, the two officers inside, and I knew what was coming. My little secret was about to come out, and Karen was in for the shock of her life. The car stopped right in front of her house, and two cops stepped out. They were big guys, wearing dark uniforms with shiny badges on their chests. Karen was still yelling, her back to them, totally clueless. One of the cops held up a clipboard and called out, "Karen Miller." His voice was loud and clear, cutting right through her shouting. She froze, like someone had hit a pause button on her. The phone slipped a little in her hand, and she turned around slow, her eyes getting wide. Her jaw dropped so low I thought it might hit the ground. The cop kept talking. "Karen Miller, we've got a warrant for your arrest." "A warrant?" "Yup, that's right, a big, official paper saying she was in trouble." Karen's face went from red to white in about 2 seconds flat. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. The cop went on, reading from his clipboard. "We've got you for noise complaints, harassment, and oh yeah, those fake HOA fines you've been pocketing." Pocketing? That means she was taking money she wasn't supposed to have, sneaking it into her own pockets like a sneaky thief. Karen just stood there, blinking, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know what to do. And that's when I decided it was my turn. I stepped forward, off my porch, and walked right up to her. "Hey, Karen," I said, keeping my voice nice and calm. I reached into my pocket and pulled out something shiny, a badge. Not just any badge, but a police detective badge. I held it up so she could see it clear as day. "I forgot to mention," I said, smiling just a little, "I'm not just your neighbor. I'm Detective Jake Lawson, and I've been investigating you for months." Her eyes got so big I thought they might pop out of her head. Her face went even whiter, like all the color just drained away. She looked at me, then at the badge, then at the cops, and back at me again. What?" she stammered, her voice all shaky. You're a detective." "Yup, that's right. I wasn't just Jake, the guy with the dog. I was Detective Jake, and I'd been watching her this whole time, not because I was nosy, but because it was my job." See, Karen's little power trip had gone too far. All those times she yelled at me, all those notes she left, all that sneaking around with her flashlight, it wasn't just annoying. It was breaking the law. She'd been bossing everyone around in Pinewood Estates, pretending she was in charge of the HOA, and making up fake fines to scare people. Then she'd take that money, the money people paid because they were scared, and keep it for herself. That's stealing. And it wasn't just me she was picking on. Other neighbors had complained, too, quietly telling the police about her mean tricks. So they sent me to live here, right across the street, to catch her in the act. For months, I'd been writing down everything she did. Every nasty note, every loud tantrum, every fake rule she made up, it all went into my notebook. I even had pictures and recordings, proof of all the bad stuff she'd been up to. Karen thought she was so smart, thinking she could scare me with her phone calls and her HOA threats. But I was smarter. I stayed quiet, played nice, and let her dig her own hole. And now, that hole was so deep she couldn't climb out. The cops stepped closer to her, and one of them pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "Let's go, Ms. Miller," he said. Karen shook her head, like she couldn't believe it. No, this is a mistake," she cried. "He's the problem. His dog." But the cop cut her off. "We've got all the evidence we need, ma'am. You're coming with us." She looked at me one last time, her eyes all panicky, but I just shrugged. Sorry, Karen, I said. You picked the wrong neighbor to mess with. Max barked happily, like he was cheering, and I gave him a pat on the head. The cops started walking Karen toward their car, and she was still muttering, trying to argue. But it was over. Her big show was done, and my secret was out. I wasn't just Jake. I was Detective Jake, and I'd busted her good. So, friends, that's the big moment. Everything exploded, and Karen found out the truth. What do you think? Did that surprise you? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let me know what you'd do if you were me. This story's wild, right? Stick around for the end. The cops didn't waste any time after the big reveal. They slapped those shiny handcuffs right on Karen's wrists, locking them with a little click that echoed across the yard. It happened right there in front of half the neighborhood, like a show nobody could look away from. People started peeking out their windows, pulling back curtains and pressing their faces to the glass. Some even stepped onto their porches, whispering to each other as Karen tried to argue her way out of it. This is a mistake, she wailed, her voice all high and squeaky. I'm the victim here. You've got it all wrong. She twisted and turned, trying to wiggle free, but the cops held her tight. I just stood there on my porch, watching it all go down. Karen could yell all she wanted, but it didn't matter anymore. The truth was out, and it wasn't on her side. See, I had evidence, tons of it. All those notes I'd been taking for months, every mean thing she said, every time she bossed me and Max around, it was all written down in my little notebook. I didn't just stop there, though. I had recordings, too, sneaky little clips of her shouting and making up fake rules. And it wasn't just me who had stuff to say. Other neighbors had complained about her, too. They'd sent letters and calls to the police, telling them how Karen had been scaring them and taking their money. All of that piled up into a big stack of proof that said one thing loud and clear: Karen was in big trouble. Turns out, she'd been scamming the HOA for cash. That's right, she wasn't just a grumpy neighbor, she was a sneak who pretended to be in charge. She'd make up fake fines, like telling people they owed money for silly things like leaving a bike in the driveway or planting the wrong flowers. Then she'd bully everyone into paying her, saying it was HOA rules. But those rules weren't real, and the money? It didn't go to the neighborhood like it was supposed to. Nope. Karen stuffed it right into her own pockets, keeping it all for herself. She thought she could keep everyone quiet by being loud and mean, but not anymore. Her little game was over. The cops started walking her toward their car, one on each side holding her arms. She dragged her feet, still yelling, "You can't do this. I didn't do anything wrong." But nobody listened. The evidence was too strong: my notes, the recordings, the neighbors' stories. It was like a big wall she couldn't climb over. As they hauled her away, I bent down and gave Max a pat on the head. "Good boy," I said, scratching behind his ears. He wagged his tail and licked my hand, happy as ever. Max didn't know it, but he'd helped me catch her just by being his goofy self. Every time Karen freaked out about him, she gave me more to write down. He was the best partner a detective could ask for, even if he didn't know it. While the police car's lights flashed red and blue, something cool started happening. The neighbors who'd been watching from their houses came outside. At first, they just stood there, looking at me and Max, but then a few of them walked over. One guy, Mr. Thompson from 2 houses down, came up and stuck out his hand. "Jake," he said, shaking my hand real hard, "we had no idea you were a detective. You're amazing." His wife nodded beside him, smiling big. "Yeah," she said, "we thought you were just the guy with the dog. But you're a hero." Then more people came over. Mrs. Lopez, who lived next door, gave me a big grin and said, "I can't believe you put up with her for so long." "Thank you." Even little Timmy from across the street ran up, his eyes wide. "Did you really catch her, Jake?" "That's so cool," he shouted, jumping up and down. I laughed and shrugged my shoulders. "Just doing my job," I said, keeping it simple. They didn't need to know all the details: how I'd been sent here by the police, how I'd watched Karen for months, how I'd stayed calm even when she drove me nuts. To them, I was just Jake, and that was fine by me. As the crowd grew, people started talking to each other, swapping stories about Karen. She fined me $50 for my mailbox being too red. Mr. Thompson said, shaking his head. She told me my grass was too tall, but it was only an inch high. Mrs. Lopez chimed in. They laughed, but you could tell they were relieved, too. Karen had been picking on everyone, making them feel small and scared, but now she was gone. The cops shoved her into the back of their car, and she was still muttering, her face pressed against the window. Then the car drove off, lights flashing, taking her away to face the consequences. I looked around at the neighbors, some I knew, some I didn't, and felt pretty good. They weren't rolling their eyes at me anymore, like they used to when Karen would yell about Max. Back then, they'd sigh or shake their heads, thinking I was just some guy with a loud dog. But now they were smiling, clapping me on the back, thanking me. You saved us, Jake, one lady called out. No more fake fines, said another. Even Max got some love. Timmy ran over and hugged him, and Max licked his face, making everyone laugh. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky all orange and pink, and the neighborhood felt different. Quieter, happier, like a big weight had been lifted off everyone's shoulders. I sat down on my porch steps with Max beside me, his head resting on my knee. We did it, buddy, I whispered to him. He didn't understand, of course. He just wagged his tail and looked up at me with those big, goofy eyes. But that was okay. He didn't need to know he'd help me take down a bully. He was just Max, and that was enough. Karen wasn't coming back anytime soon. The cops had all the proof they needed to keep her in trouble for a long time. No more notes on my door, no more yelling about bushes, no more sneaking around with flashlights. She'd tried to boss us all around, but in the end, she lost. And me? I got to keep living my quiet life with Max, only now the neighbors liked me a whole lot more. So, friends, that's how it all wrapped up. Justice was served, and Karen got what she deserved. What do you think? Did she have it coming? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and tell me if you've ever seen a bully get caught like that. This story's almost done, but stick around for the last bit. Later that night, after all the craziness with Karen and the cops, I sat down on my porch with Max. The sun was long gone, and the sky was dark, sprinkled with tiny, twinkling stars. It was quiet now, no more yelling, no more police lights flashing, just the soft sound of crickets chirping in the bushes. Max flopped down next to me, his big fluffy head resting on my leg, and I gave him a little pat. We had a wild day, didn't we, buddy? I said, smiling at him. He didn't answer, of course. He just wagged his tail a little and closed his eyes, happy to relax. I leaned back in my chair and looked up at the stars, thinking about everything that happened. Karen thought she was the big boss of Pinewood Estates. She walked around like she owned the place, telling everyone what to do, leaving mean notes, and making up fake rules. She thought she could push people around me, Max, the other neighbors, and get away with it. She looked at me and saw just a regular guy with a dog, someone she could boss and scare. But she never saw me coming. She had no idea who I really was or what I was up to. And that was her big mistake. See, sometimes the person you think is weak, the one you pick on or ignore, is the one holding all the cards. Karen thought I was nothing special, just a guy she could yell at about my dog. But I wasn't weak. I was a detective, and I had a plan. I stayed quiet, I smiled, I waved, and all the while, I was building a case against her. She didn't know it, but I was the one in charge the whole time. Not her. And when the truth came out, she was the one who looked silly, not me. That got me thinking about something bigger. Life's funny like that, isn't it? You never really know who someone is just by looking at them. Karen judged me fast, thought I was a pushover because I didn't fight back. But judging people by how they look or act can get you in trouble. Maybe the quiet kid at school, the one who doesn't talk much, is super smart or really brave. Maybe the person who seems small or shy is actually super strong inside. You don't know until you give them a chance or until they surprise you, like I surprised Karen. So here's a little tip from me to you: next time someone tries to judge you or boss you around, don't get mad right away. Just smile. Let them think what they want. Because you never know who's really in control. Maybe it's you, holding your own secret power, waiting for the right moment to show it. Maybe you're the one with the winning hand, like I was with Karen. You don't have to yell or fight to prove you're strong. Sometimes being calm and smart is the best way to win. As I sat there with Max, I felt pretty good. The neighborhood was peaceful again, and people weren't scared of Karen anymore. They weren't annoyed with me and Max, either. They liked us now. All those times I stayed patient, all those waves and smiles, they paid off. I didn't let Karen get to me, and in the end, I came out on top. That's a cool feeling, you know? Knowing you did the right thing, even when it was hard. It made me think about how strong you can be when you don't let bullies push you down. Max let out a little snore, and I chuckled. He didn't care about any of this. He was just happy to be Max, chasing balls and sniffing bushes. But me? I learned something big from all this. People like Karen might seem loud and tough, but that doesn't mean they're unbeatable. Sometimes the quiet ones, the ones who don't make a fuss, are the ones who change everything. I changed things for Pinewood Estates, and it felt awesome. So, friends, what do you think about all this? Have you ever had a moment where you turned the tables on someone like Karen? Maybe someone was mean to you, and you found a smart way to show them you're not weak. Or maybe you stood up for a friend and surprised everyone. I'd love to hear your stories. Drop them in the comments below. I'm reading every single one, and I bet they're amazing. Oh, and if you like this wild tale about me, Max, and Karen, stick around. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more stories like this. I've got plenty more to tell, and they're all just as fun. Before I go, let's think about one last thing. Imagine you're in my shoes, sitting on that porch after a big win. What would you say to yourself? I told myself, Jake, you did good. You stayed cool, and you made things right. It's like a little pat on the back, you know? You should give yourself one, too, whenever you do something brave or smart. Because you're stronger than you think, stronger than any bully, any mean note, any loud voice trying to boss you around. The stars kept twinkling up there, bright and pretty, and I took a deep breath of the cool night air. Max snuggled closer, and I smiled. Life was good again in Pinewood Estates, and I had a feeling it was going to stay that way. Karen was gone, justice was served, and me and Max, we were the heroes of the day. Not bad for a guy and his dog, right? So that's it, friends, the end of this crazy adventure. What's your big takeaway? Mine's simple: don't judge people too fast, and don't let bullies scare you. You've got your own power, even if it's quiet. Use it, and you might just surprise everyone just like I did. See you in the next story.